Today we celebrate Good Shepherd Sunday, and I'd like to talk to you this morning about an outstanding shepherd of the church, a priest by the name of Father Stanley Rother. I don't know if any of you have heard of Father Stanley Rother, but he has an exceptional story. He lived in Oklahoma, in the Diocese of Oklahoma City, and as a young man, he thought about becoming a priest, and so he went to the seminary in Texas to study. And he studied there for 6 years, and at the end of the course of his studies of 6 years, even though he still had about 2 more years to go, the formation faculty said, you know, really, you're a good guy, but probably not called to be a priest. You don't really have the academic giftedness to be able to handle all the academics of becoming a priest. And so they asked him to stop his seminary studies. But his bishop gave him another chance and sent him to Maryland to study for 2 more years. At the end of those 2 years, so a total of 8 years of study, the formation in Maryland said, well, you know, he's not the brightest guy, but he's got a very generous heart. He's very dedicated, and even though maybe the nuances of theology are not really his forte, nevertheless, you should ordain him because he would be a good man to serve God's people. And so he was ordained a priest in 1963. He worked in the Diocese of Oklahoma City, and then in 1968 he volunteered to go and work in Guatemala. Sort of interesting because he was not able to really learn Latin, but he learned Spanish in order to work in Guatemala and the native language of the native peoples, and translated the entire New Testament into their language. Even though he was not really that gifted linguistically, nevertheless he learned these 2 languages, one of which is very difficult Native American language. He worked there until about 1981. In 1980, because of the political upheaval in this country of Guatemala, he was number 8 on a list of those who were supposed to be assassinated and killed in the upheaval of Guatemala. And so his parishioners came up to him and said, Father, you've got to leave. You've got to go back to the United States so that you'll be safe. And after they implored him for so long, he went back to Oklahoma City. And he stayed there a few months, and while he was there, he kept praying and reflecting on this gospel passage, that the Good Shepherd does not leave his sheep, that the Good Shepherd stays and fights the wolf when he approaches. And so he said to his bishop in December of 1980, I've got to go back to Guatemala. And his bishop allowed him to go back. He arrived back in May of 1981 because he wanted to be there to celebrate Easter Sunday with his people. And then just a few weeks later, in the middle of the night, 2 men broke into his rectory and assassinated him at gunpoint. He was killed for his faith. Just this last year, he was declared by Pope Francis to be blessed, to be in the kingdom of heaven and worthy of example. What a great story of the Good Shepherd. This priest who, although he had the safety of being back here in the United States, as he prayed, he said, I cannot leave my people. I have to go back to Guatemala, and if that means offering my life for them, then I gladly give my life in service to God and his people. A great and beautiful example of protecting the sheep and laying down our lives. Today, as we celebrate Good Shepherd Sunday, I think we all make the clear connection that Jesus is the Good Shepherd. I think we also make the connection that priests are supposed to be the Good Shepherd after the heart of Christ. Priests should model after Jesus Christ. They should live their lives in a similar example to Blessed Stanley Rother and give their lives to God and his people. But I think sometimes we fail to make the connection as we celebrate Good Shepherd Sunday that each and every Christian should be the Good Shepherd. Each and every one of you is called to defend the church and proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'd like to offer just a few examples of how that might be done, especially in the midst of family life. You know, we know that in this time, family life is being attacked ferociously. Our Lady of Fatima said that the last attack on the Christian church would be the attack on the family. And we are clearly seeing that happen. Parents, I want to remind you, all the parents here, you have to be the good shepherd for your families. Moms and dads, you are the good shepherd that's called to protect your sheep, your children. And there are many attacks. The good shepherd, I think, does two things. First of all, he stops the wolf from coming in. But he also finds good grazing ground, good food for the sheep. So the first of those, the good shepherd protects the sheep against the wolf. I think that there are many families today that open wide the doors of their houses in order to let the wolves come in and devour their children. And they do that by turning on the TV and watching all kinds of crazy, absurd, anti-Christian, terrible shows on TV while their little children are sitting there watching right along with them. Parents, if you're not watching what your kids are watching on TV, if you're not being careful with their viewing hours, you're letting the wolf right into the middle of your family. If you're not careful with the internet and with social media with your children, you're opening the door for the wolf to come straight into their houses. I would say to you, parents, I would encourage you, please, I don't think any young kid should ever have access to the internet in a private place in your house behind closed doors. And also, most adults shouldn't also. Your internet connection should be in a private place in the middle of your living room where everyone can see it, so that you, as parents, can be the good shepherd and make sure that that stuff is not coming in to devour the consciences of your young children. Parents also, apart from making sure what comes in, has to make sure that their children go out to places that are safe. So I would encourage you, parents, please, be aware of what your kids are learning in the classrooms. Be aware of what the textbooks are saying that your kids are reading. Be aware of the curriculum that's happening in the public schools, because it would be nice to say there are many, many dedicated and wonderful public school teachers, but then there are also some who promote a very rigorous form of atheism, which again is not good for the sheep to be exposed to. I would encourage you to be aware so that you can challenge the schools to teach according to your moral, ethical convictions. Also, to be aware of the friends that your kids visit. You know, I don't want to be over the top here, but I would think that parents would want to sort of do a little interview of the parents of the kids that their families, that their kids are visiting, at least that you know what the parents are like, that they're not crazy, believing any kind of insane thing that they're passing on to your kid. You have to watch where your children go when they visit their friends. What are their friends' families like? Because you, moms and dads, are called to be the good shepherd, to protect your children, and to feed them with proper nourishment. I would also just say one other thing, because it's so prevalent in our society. The good shepherd doesn't run when things get tough. Now, I want to be careful about what I'm saying here, because I want to talk a little bit about the divorce mentality that's part of our society. I know well that sometimes people should separate from their spouse. Because of situations of abuse or violence, profound dysfunction, it is necessary. I myself have encouraged couples to separate from each other because of the terrible situation that they've arrived at. But we have in our society a divorce mentality, where people, when they get married, say, well, I'm going to get married, but if it doesn't work, bam, I'm out of here. They have an attitude that as soon as something does not go perfectly right, the moment there's a little bit of difficulty, the moment that there's a challenge, the moment that there's some conflict in the family, they're ready to say, well, let's just get divorced. That is the exact opposite of the Good Shepherd. We can't run from our vocation simply because it's difficult. And if God has called you to the beautiful vocation of marriage, if you've stood here before the altar of God and said, I declare before God and His church that I will live with this person for the rest of my days, then unless you have spoken to a priest and sought counsel, we're called to stay in there for the sake of protecting our kids. We have to preserve and guard the beauty and the dignity of marriage. Now again, I know, probably undoubtedly there are people here in this community who have experienced divorce. Sometimes I totally understand that. What I'm talking about is the divorce mentality where you just throw it all away after a heartbeat because there's some small difficulty. That's not a good shepherd. We're called to stay in the battle, to stay in the fray, in the difficulty, to learn humility, to learn love, to learn service, and as a husband and wife to work out your difficulties. Why? For the protection of your family and the safety of your children who need a loving mother and a loving father. My brothers and sisters, we know well we live in a crazy world, a crazy, wonderful world that God has made us disciples of. We are here to proclaim and promote the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we never have to be afraid. Why? Because in the end, Jesus is our good shepherd. In the end, Jesus takes care of us. If we rely on Christ, the good shepherd, He will show us the way. He will lead us to pastures where we are nourished in our soul, and He will protect us against the attacks of the enemies. I invite you today to pray for all priests, that they may be good shepherds after the heart of Jesus, to pray for all moms and dads, that they may be good shepherds, to pray for all Christian people, that we, all of us, may see Christ, the Good Shepherd, as our protector, our guide, and the model of each of us as we proclaim Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord.
Amen.